The sky over Washington, D.C. darkened on an early October evening. The lights outside the Capitol were still on, but inside, all activity had ceased. No more hurried votes, no more footsteps echoing in the marble hallways. Congress was off. The federal government was officially shut down. Americans woke up the next morning to find things still running until they realized something had stopped. A flight was delayed because air traffic controllers hadn't been paid. A post office wasn't open. A national park was temporarily closed. The paralysis spread like a crack in the paint of democracy. But as the agencies shut down, the microphones were turned on.
It shouldn't be a game, but clearly they have decided to make it a game. And it's interesting that you bring up the retaliation. The Republican response to us allegedly holding the government hostage is to go out and hurt the people, the very people that are serving our country and serving our constituents. This tells you who it is that they are fighting for. They didn't say they were going to hurt the billionaires. They said
inhumane policies. On the night of September 30, Congress failed to pass a budget. A day later, the entire federal system was shut down. Nearly 750,000 federal employees were furloughed, losing more than $400 million in pay each day. Some were still working without pay, from air traffic controllers to FBI officers to military personnel. But while those employees waited for each delayed paycheck, the Republican-controlled White House made a shocking decision. It froze $18 billion in infrastructure funding for New York State, home to Democratic leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. Another $8 billion in clean energy funding in 16 blue states was also blocked. While Republican-led
share with you some thoughts, answer some questions, tell you, I guess, reiterate the simple truths of how we got here. Those truths have been obscured just a bit because the Democrats are in a relentless effort to spin the facts, but it's always good when the facts and the evidence are on your side. And I don't want you to listen to the arguments of politicians. If you're watching at home, I want you to look at the real facts. And I'm going to try to hear in a very abbreviated summary manner to present those to you, and the facts are very clear. Okay, so the first fact is by way of reminder, how did we get here?
There's
Why?
no need to negotiate, Mike Johnson said at a press conference on the morning of October 1. We're not saving a system that's failed. For Jasmine Crockett, the words were a reversal of the entire political ethic. The people they're not going to save, she said on air, are the workers, the teachers, the nurses, the people who keep this country running. Her voice rose to a crescendo of accusation. Republicans didn't say they were going to hurt billionaires. They said they were going to hurt the people who serve this country. In that moment, politics returned to its original form, no longer about budget terms, but about two visions of America. One side saw austerity as fiscal discipline, the other saw it as disguised cruelty. Crockett knew that behind every number were real lives and families. She had worked as a public defender before entering Congress. She knew what happened when public services were shut down, when poor people lost access to doctors, when a benefit was eliminated. And she knew that politics was sometimes like a courtroom where whoever defined the law won. Mike Johnson, on the other hand, is the embodiment of classic conservative politics. He believes that big government is a threat to liberty. For Johnson, retrenchment is more than a tactic, it's an ideal. And like all ideals, it can be brutal when it
share with you some thoughts, answer some questions, tell you, I guess, reiterate the simple truths of how we got here. Those truths have been obscured just a bit because the Democrats are in a relentless effort to spin the facts, but it's always good when the facts and the evidence are on your side. And I don't want you to listen to the arguments of politicians. If you're watching at home, I want you to look at the real facts. And I'm going to try to hear in a very abbreviated summary manner to present those to you, and the facts are very clear.
Budget called orderly shutdowns. The U.S. economy went into artificial respiration. Medicare calls were suspended. Civil lawsuits were postponed indefinitely. The IRS stopped refunds. Small parts of the system began to close like a choked vein. Economists showed charts on television. But amid the curves, Crockett saw something else, a loss of confidence. I'm not worried about the budget, she said. I'm worried about confidence. Community groups in Texas began organizing food drives for affected federal workers. Charities saw demand double. Meanwhile, red states like Florida and Texas, run by Republicans themselves, were spared as many local spending remained. Millions of comments erupted on social media. One side called Jasmine a working-class heroine. Another mocked her as just a whiner. But in this division, an ancient question arose. Who does government serve? That question is never simple, and that's why it's dangerous. On the night of October 2, the White House sent out an internal memo. If Congress did not reach an agreement within 48 hours, several departments would begin permanent layoffs, an estimated 150,000 positions. The news was not made public, but it leaked. And like all leaks in Washington, it had a purpose. Mike Johnson wanted pressure, Jasmine Crockett wanted light. She stepped to the podium in a special session of the House of Representatives. Behind her, a screen displayed in white letters, "Human cost of a shutdown." 750,000 people, she said. That's not just a number. That's 750,000 families. That's 750,000 reasons why we're working tonight. Then she looked across the Republican bench. But I guess, for some people in this room, that's just a statistic. The air froze. The camera panned to Mike Johnson's face still. It was what the media called the Crockett moment, a moment when reason collided with emotion. To understand this crisis, one must go back to the summer of 2025, when Congress passed the Trump administration's spending package with two controversial points: cuts to Medicaid and a reduction in ACA tax subsidies. Republicans argued that it was a necessary balance to reduce the deficit. But as the Congressional Budget Office pointed out, an estimated 6.8 million people were at risk of losing their health insurance next year. When Democrats objected, they were accused of holding the economy hostage. When Republicans refused, they said it was fiscal responsibility. Two languages, two realities. "We live in two Americas," Crockett said in an interview. "We live in two Americas, one where government is the refuge and one where government is the enemy." The phrase rang out like a knife cutting through politics because, in truth, every financial crisis in America is a manifestation of a crisis of confidence. When half the nation believes the state is a threat and the other half believes the state is a savior, every bill becomes a trench. Mike Johnson makes no secret of his goal to prove that Democrats are just spending money to buy the hearts and minds of the people. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, wants to prove that Republicans are holding the poor hostage to serve the rich. The people they're protecting, she said at a press conference, are the people who don't need protecting. She cites a number: in fiscal year 2024 alone, the richest 1% of Americans will receive more tax breaks than the entire Medicaid spending of 20 states combined. That's not an accident, she said. That's a choice. The word choice is key, because in politics, there are no accidents, only priorities. As the negotiations continued in silence, America began to feel the slow pulse of a nation starved of oxygen. Medicare emergency calls were put on hold. FBI agents continued to work without pay. Airport workers ate canned bread and waited for news from Washington. Inside Congress, no one talked about the budget. All was about who was to blame. Television showed two parallel threats. On one side, Mike Johnson, his voice deep and his eyes firm, declaring that the American people need smaller government. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, her voice clear and decisive, countering that. The American people need a government that won't turn its back on them. The two lines ran like two countries speaking two different languages, while politicians argued about principle, people waited for a paycheck. But this crisis is not just about economics, it is about the moral character of the republic. Crockett understood that America did not collapse overnight. It fell apart piece by piece, each time the government chose power over people. When the government decides who deserves help and who doesn't, that's not democracy, that's moral triage, she warned. The phrase went viral on social media, becoming a slogan: "The government doesn't choose who deserves to live, it makes sure everyone lives." In the following days, the White House announced that it would begin permanently laying off some federal employees. Tens of thousands of people could lose their jobs. Crockett emerged from the closed-door meeting, her face tense. The press swarmed. She didn't shout, just said quietly, "If they think this crisis will silence us, they're wrong. We'll speak louder," and she meant it. That night, she appeared on MSNBC, CNN, and NBC nightly news. Her voice was hoarse from the constant interviewing, but each word cut like a knife. None of us want to shut down the government, but if the choice is between staying silent to protect billionaires or speaking up to protect working people, I choose to speak up. She didn't just protest, she lectured. She spoke about the nature of power, about how a budget isn't just money, but a moral statement. A budget, she said, is the nation's most practical statement. It shows who we truly value. On the other side, Mike Johnson countered, the Democrats are kidnapping this country to force us to spend more. They want a state that controls everything: healthcare, energy, life. Johnson knew who he was speaking to people tired of government, who believe that all problems start in Washington. But Crockett also knew who she was speaking to people who believe that government can still be a lifeline if it is guided by compassion. The gap between those two visions is widening. The New York Times editorialized, "This is no longer a debate about finances, but about identity. The nation is asking itself, is government there to control people or to care for them?" In the article, they quoted Crockett, "We can't call cutting Medicare fiscal freedom. When you let people die because you can't get medicine, that's not freedom, that's abandonment." In the middle of the night, the hashtags began to appear. Number Stand with Crockett, number Human Cost, number Not an Excuse. Within hours, millions of shares flooded across platforms. But there was more than applause. Conservatives saw her as a symbol of governmentism. Fox News programs described her as the face of progressive failure, repeatedly playing her, saying people are not numbers, then quipping, "Yes, But budgets are numbers, Congresswoman. Crockett did not respond. History will not ask me if I was gentle enough, she said. History will ask me if I dared. Inside the House, the atmosphere was tense. Johnson held firm, but cracks began to appear in his own party. A group of moderates demanded a temporary deal to pay for troops and security. He refused. Meanwhile, Crockett and his Democratic allies drafted a small bill, a partial reopening of the government, except for health care and basic pay. Mike Johnson wouldn't allow a vote. The perfect gridlock. And in that gridlock, America examined itself. Every interview, every editorial, every tweet, all asked the question, who really ran the country? The elected or the people they funded? America has shut down the government before 1995.
We want to improve healthcare. We have ideas and plans to do that.
It's not just a technical problem, it's a philosophical conflict. Johnson believes cuts are the only way to save the nation from a debt crisis. Crockett believes the real crisis isn't in the books, it's in the people. Between those two beliefs lies a political system trapped within itself. In Crockett's home state of Texas, volunteers began setting up donation signs for federal employees. A mother of three texted her office, I don't understand everything you said in Washington, but I understand you're trying to keep me from losing my insurance. Crockett read the text on television, her eyes slightly turned. Politics isn't about power. It's about going to bed and not worrying about your kids getting sick and not having medicine. That statement silenced many. Even some Republicans who had been quiet in private began to leak their discontent with Johnson. They feared that the party's image was being equated with ruthlessness. One unnamed congressman told Politico, Mike is playing power, but Crockett is playing heart. In politics, which game lasts longer? By mid-October, the government was still shut down. The economic cost had passed $10 billion. Investors were warning of a possible credit downgrade. But worse was fatigue. People were turning off their televisions, they were losing faith. Crockett recognized this. The most dangerous thing is not outrage, she said in a speech. It's apathy. Because when people stop caring, the powerful stop being held accountable. Her speech was more than a rebuke. It was a wake-up call. She reminded them that America was born out of crisis, out of dissent, out of protest. We were a nation of people who said no to injustice. We cannot become a nation of people who bow to budgets. As the crisis entered its fourth week, the air in Washington was as thick as lead fog on the Capitol dome. No one was talking about budgets, interest rates, or deficits. Now everyone was talking about one thing, fatigue.
We know that the last
Streams of protesters appeared in front of the Capitol building, federal workers, nurses, teachers, the people who had once been called the engine that keeps this country running. They carried no party signs, just handwritten signs. I just want to work. In the middle of the crowd, Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, not as a congresswoman, but as a citizen. She held a field microphone, her voice hoarse but firm. This is no longer a party story. This is a story about us, the people who are being held hostage in a power play. Cheers rose, but in the distance, the lights of the Capitol remained off. Mike Johnson did not move from his post. He still believed his steadfastness was a sign of discipline, not stubbornness. In a closed-door meeting, he said, if we give in now, they will use the government to blackmail us every year. Across the wall, Crockett told his Democratic colleagues, if we stay silent now, they will victimize us every year. Two logics, two beliefs, irreconcilable. Outside Washington, the fallout was widespread. Small businesses began laying off workers because of government contracts being delayed. Military families were taking out loans to pay their utility bills. Cash-only signs were popping up in supermarkets as benefits payments were suspended. National television showed a mother in Pennsylvania standing before the cameras, tears streaming down her face as she said, I worked for the government for 12 years. Now I have to choose between paying the rent or buying medicine for my child. The scene silenced the country. But in Washington, the negotiations continued like a play on repeat. In the final session of the week, Mike Johnson stepped to the podium, looked straight into the row of seats across from him. We will not pass a bill that will add to the national debt, Crockett replied, without a microphone, and we will not pass a bill that will add to the people's despair. The room fell silent. Outside, the first winter rain fell on the Capitol steps onto the two locked visions. The media called it the winter of disbelief. Commentators spoke of two-speed America, the America of television and the America of real life. One talked about principles, the other about dinner. In an interview, Crockett said slowly, they say I'm a dreamer, that I don't understand budget limits, but the real limit isn't in the budget, it's in the hearts of people. She paused, then added, and when compassion runs out, no number will save this country. On the other side, Mike Johnson countered that he wasn't doing it for power, but for the future of our children. But in the spotlight, those words sounded like a distant echo of a system that had forgotten its present people. Days passed, no deal. The government remained shut down. The shutdown signs no longer caused anger, they became part of the landscape, as if America were learning to come to terms with its own paralysis. But amid the silence, something was moving. Community organizations sprang up everywhere, We Keep Us Running, Paycheck Chain, Civic Pantry. They collected food, supported laid-off workers, shared legal information. A new energy emerged, not partisan, but human. Crockett saw that on a trip back to Texas. She met a group of volunteers who had once been apolitical, now lining up to distribute food to federal workers. One woman told her, "I used to think politics had nothing to do with me. Now I know it's everything." Crockett smiled, then said, "Politics isn't about who wins in the boardroom. Politics is about who survives on the street." There is no clear ending, no bells ringing to reopen the government, no handshakes between the two sides. Just a nation at a crossroads, where morality and power stare each other down, and neither has backed down. But amidst the gray haze of the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett's voice still rings out in interviews, in protests, in thousands of viral videos. A nation's greatness is not measured by its GDP or its stock market index, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. It's not a promise, nor a call. It's a reminder that even when the government stops working, common sense must still work. When people write about this period, they may not remember every budget, every vote, every speech, but they will remember that a young congressman from Texas stood up in the middle of a storm and reminded America that justice cannot stop because the budget stops. Because in every democracy, the moment that truly defines a nation is not when it wins, but when it questions itself. If you find this story worth pondering, please like, share, and subscribe channel to continue following our incisive analysis of global politics and power. Every share you make helps us continue telling the stories others choose to keep silent. Let's keep the light of truth shining.